There's another concept you introduce, which you refer to as the Law of Assimilation, referring to the way that progressively higher forms of life unite with things outside themselves. That they have a higher, as they have a higher form of life, they also have a higher way of interacting with things outside themselves.
Right. That was put forward by Archbishop Fulton Sheen,
Oh, wow.
thinking about Summa Contra Gentiles 411 of Saint,
Was that in his
Saint.
dissertation?
Was that in
His
his
early book
dissertation?
on
Was that
philosophy
in
of
his
science?
PhD dissertation, or was that in his book on philosophy of science? It was in one of the two, and I can't remember which. I think it was in his
Okay.
dissertation. Although I used both of them in my book to
I thought
cite,
they
and
were
I
the
give
same.
it.
I thought they were one and the same, but I could be
No,
wrong.
no, they're two different works. Yeah,
Okay,
and
gotcha.
I think it was in his PhD thesis. Yeah, but the idea is that the lower the being is, or the yeah, starting from that standpoint, the more it has to break things apart. So everything needs to be nutrition. Everything has to have nutrition, so to speak, in order to survive, of some sort, you know. And so a plant breaks things. When it draws in things that it feeds on, or an animal even, they'll break things apart into pieces. So an animal attacks another animal, it rips it apart, and then its digestive chemicals break it down into chemicals, and then the victim, the thing it preyed upon, is assimilated into it. And when in that would be the vegetative aspect. And so the sensory aspect is not quite the same. The sensory aspect is not quite as violent. The sensory aspect, you look at something and you see patterns of color and patterns of sound, and you take those in. So you are pulling it apart in a sense. You aren't taking the being itself inside of you. You're taking certain sensory aspects, but you're not decomposing it like a carnivore with its prey. You're not ripping a chunk of it off, breaking it down to its basic chemicals, and then reassimilating them back up. You're actually taking coherent patterns, coherent sound patterns, coherent visual patterns, coherent sensory smell patterns, and so forth. So you're not as quite as destructive to the thing that you're sensing as eating it. And so you bring those in, and then you reassemble them in a composite picture in your mind. And then beyond that is the intelligence. The intelligence is, in the classical sense, is a structure that assimilates being. So it removes what's called the formal aspect. So there's a material aspect and the formal aspect of something. So like I use the example of a glass triangle. The triangle is the formal shape, and then the glass is the matter, the material aspect of it. And so the mind understands the formality of something. So it's not a destructive, it's not pulling pieces of sensory aspects out of it, but it's taking the whole formal organizing principle, and it unites itself with that. And then beyond that, when you get even higher,
It proceeds in increasingly
yeah,
simple
yeah,
ways.
increase in more and more simple way. In other words, the whole is drawn in more and more in completely. And an example of this would be in the Catholic idea of communion. When you receive the body and blood of Christ, you aren't torn to pieces. You don't experience that. It's an act of love where you come in union with God, and it's not something violent at all. It's your whole being is united with God. Assuming you're in
So
the
it
proper
sounds
state
like
of graces, or
the
yeah.
intellectuals who think that everything has to be deconstructed in order to be understood are really just imitating the lowest forms of plant life.
Well, that would be the notion that's the human way of doing things. That's called a rational, the that's for an intellect working in matter. It's called a rational intellect. It takes things apart and reassembles it in a sense to know and understand. And so, animality is they're not intellectual, but they have a sensory
Sure.
similarity to that. And
But I mean
beyond
the
that,
ones who
yeah,
just simply deconstruct things,
right,
and
yeah, yeah,
that's it. They're just
yeah.
imitating the lowest bacteria.
Well, yeah. So the opposite coin of that is called intuitive intellect, what an angel has. So an angel's given the idea of a dog, given the perfect idea of a dog. If God would, hypothetically speaking, just for the sake of discussion here, would want an angel to know about dogs, he'd give him the idea of it. So we spend all our life seeing dogs, and we form an image of what a dog is. And so we take all these particulars and make a composite of them. The angel's given the idea, the sort of the perfect idea of a dog, and it can immediately conclude to all the particular dogs that ever were or ever could be. And so I say in the book, the closest idea you could get to this maybe is when if you've been studying a lot, for an exam, and you're plotting through all the examples, and all of a sudden you get it all of a sudden, and everything gets, you get an idea of the picture in your mind with the way, what's being trying to taught you, and then that organizes and all of a sudden you see all the parts and everything you've been studying in a different light. They all become organized and coherent and understandable in your mind. And this is sort of a you know a very, very remote reflection of angelic knowledge, that the angel's given the perfect idea and immediately concludes all the particulars and knows them in a perfect manner. And so that would be called intuitive intellect. And so that doesn't destroy things at all. It just, simply knows them, so to speak.